Welcome to the closing keynote of the first virtual day of 2 days of awesomeness with Day of Security. My name is Jacqueline Powell, and I go by Jack as in Jack of all trades. And I'm going to talk to you today about being a CISO. So let me get my slides up again. All right. So I'm going to talk about 4 things today. I'm going to share with you my journey to a CISO. I'm going to share with you some pros and cons about being a CISO. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the CISO role. What are some aspects of it? What are some reporting structures? And what are the trends that I am seeing in the CISO role? And then I'm going to close my remarks this evening, depending on what time zone you're dialing in from, with some questions you should be asking yourself about your career. As I mentioned, my name is Jacqueline, Jack Powell, Jack of all trades, master of none. And I'm here to share with you some funny, I do have a little bit of a dark sense of humor, and I just wanted to share with all of you my first ever meme, which was created because I saw this meme, and it was a white guy, Bryan Cranston. And I said, you know what, that not all CISOs are white guys. So this is my first meme, and I think it depicts a little bit about some of the challenges that happen when you're in the CISO role for an extended period of time. So how did I get here? I'm going to talk really quick through the background and my first career, and then I'm going to share with you my cybersecurity career. So first of all, I'm a Navy brat. That means I went to 12 different schools by the time I graduated high school. Learned how to be the weird new kid on a pretty regular basis. I also was a college dropout. I went for a couple of years, worked for a couple of years, and then went back and actually got a psychology degree. Then I worked a series of random jobs, which I refer to as my finding my no period of my career. As I was early working, I had a series of jobs. I was pilot recruiter, I was carpenter's assistant, a variety of things. And that really helped kind of zero in a little bit more on my technology career. My technology career got started really at Reuters, the news agency, and just continued from there. Had some jobs running computer labs, installing hardware, working help desk. And then I moved over into consulting. I worked for a company called Capgemini, worked for them for 5 years, started out on the delivery side, ended up on the sales side, which if you had ever told me I would be doing sales, I would have told you you were crazy. And yet sales is something that you'll see why you need that as a CISO. I went back and got a master's degree. It's an MBA, but I got it in a nonprofit organization. So I spent a period of time doing nonprofit organizational technology strategy work. Then, unfortunately, my life happened to me, and I got a divorce, and I moved to Vieques, Puerto Rico, and bought a restaurant because I figured, how hard could it be? While I was there, I met my husband, fell in love, and decided to start a family, went back to work in the state of Virginia. And that is what started my cybersecurity career. My husband and I switched places. He stayed home with the kid, and I went back to work. And I had a bunch of military companies who were my clients doing some IT work for them in the customer relationship management space. They taught me everything I know about physical security, so defense in depth, intrusion prevention systems, things along those lines. I was doing physical security at nuclear power plants when a particularly nasty piece of malware that refers and was attacking operational technology cyber, and I did see that earlier today there was a workshop on operational technology cyber. I was very excited to see that. But this piece of malware called Stuxnet was hitting some of my clients I was selling physical security systems to. And that really, in 2009, was the beginning of my cyber career, because my nuclear power plants turned to me and said, you work for one of those military companies. Surely you must be doing something in cyber security. And I said, I have absolutely no idea, but I'll find out and get back to you. And that's exactly what ended up happening, because I did find out. Then I worked with the defense industrial base. I worked for that government contractor I was mentioning, and I had the honor of collecting feedback to help author what's known as the NIST CSF. And actually there's a typo in there, sorry about that. It's the Critical Infrastructure and Key Resources Cybersecurity Framework. A lot of private industries are now using that today, and I'm happy to say that I was one of the original contributors. Then I had a weird sort of sideways stint over into energy security. which is defined as using less energy, diversifying your supply, and then securing what you have. And securing what you have has everything to do with physical as well as cybersecurity. Then I worked in an oil and gas company for several years. And lo and behold, I met a unicorn, my first female CISO. I was terrified to approach her, but I did. And I asked her if she would be willing to mentor me. Because I saw it, I knew I could be it. And she said yes, which was fantastic. So I set about getting my certification, my CISM certification. I wrote my personal mission statement. And for anybody who's been to my LinkedIn profile, you know that my personal mission statement is to inspire and empower the next generation of cyber warriors. And that is why I am so excited to be talking to you all today. But I also wanted to highlight from my own career story the importance of mentoring. Not just mentoring you receiving, but also mentoring those around you and behind you. It's really important for this industry. After I decided to leave oil and gas behind, I was searching for OT, IT, cyber jobs. I ended up at a retail manufacturer, a global organization that was based in North Carolina, which happens to be where my husband lives, running our oyster farm. And I was the deputy CISO. I wasn't there for very long when the global pandemic hit and the recruiters came and found me. You have the CISO letters on your job description, and they were looking for me, and they recruited me specifically because I had a lot of the experience you see on the left. I had business experience, I had IT experience, and I had the cyber experience. And what they were really looking for was that combination to become a CISO for an organization that I'm the CISO of today, which is a financial services organization as well as an insurance company. So I thought nuclear power plants were heavily regulated until I came here. Wow. There's a lot of regulations that I end up having to attest to with my team and my function. The other thing that I had been doing for the last 4 or 5 roles was I was contributing to the board of director reporting. And I put that down as the last piece of my cybersecurity career because that's really become my area of focus. And that's probably where I'm heading down this road of my career, is helping boards of directors in various corporations understand what do they really need to know and what do they need to ask in order to be treating cybersecurity as an enterprise level risk. All right, so let me talk. I want to be sensitive of the time. I'm going to go into some pros and cons of the CISO role. Pro, mission alignment, a sense of purpose. I love that every day I get out of bed, I put my feet on the floor, and I think to myself, I'm going to punch bad guys in the face. That's not actually what I do, but that's kind of what I do. I defend my organization, and my team defends my organization, and that feels really good. Another pro of working in the CISO role is it's a growing field. So there's a lot of job and career security. It's also another plus is it's growing in terms of executive and board of directors areas of focus. That's a positive. That gets a lot of attention. And that means that when you're asking for support and resources for your projects, that it has executive level attention. Another pro, no day is the same. People ask me, so tell me about a typical day in the life of the CISO. And I'm like, what typical day? There is no typical day. I never know what is going to blow up, what we're going to discover, what regulatory, maybe some third-party attestation. You never know. And every day is different. So that's fantastic if you don't mind never being bored. The other pro that I put, and not everybody does, but I get excited when I feel like I'm firing on all 4 cylinders. I love it when everything in my past, everything in all of my work experience, everything in my education, my random life experience can all work together to help me be the best I can possibly be in my job every day. So that, if you enjoy that multifaceted jack of all trades kind of role, CISO role is for you. Let's talk about some of the cons of the CISO role. Number 1, you see the dark side of our species every day. And let's face it, folks, that actually can get to you eventually. A lot of people think my dark sense of humor is quite amusing, but it is dark. And it's kind of a bummer because they just never stop, right? It feels like the threat actors are always out manning us, out funding us, and it's exhausting. So speaking of it being a growing field, sometimes one of the cons is you just can't find people to hire. And then even when you hire them and you train them up, they leave. So you have retention issues all over the place because of the dynamic nature of the cybersecurity market. Another negative of the CISO role is that it has growing executive and board focus. There are weeks when I think to myself, didn't I just do my quarterly reporting to the board? Oh my gosh, am I really gearing up for the next board reporting? So executive and board attention is a double-edged sword. It's a good thing because it can cut through BS and sometimes get you funding and get projects moving. But other times it's kind of exhausting because you're constantly on the microscope and you're constantly having to stand and deliver status reports. No day is the same, no year is the same, and that means you never get to rest. And last, but certainly not least, what I would consider a con of the CISO role is that there's no option to be a master. I'm a jack of all trades, and I need to be a jack of all trades every day. If I wanted to be known as a master in, I don't know, cloud architecture security, I would love to do that, but I can't. There's no way the CISO can spend their time diving too far down into a topic. And that makes some people kind of uncomfortable because you really do have to rely on the expertise of your team. All right, so I want to talk about a couple of aspects of a couple of pieces that make up CISO roles. First one is sometimes resilience and recovery is in the CISO's responsibilities, and sometimes it's not. And this has a lot to do with probably because I am so aligned to the NIST cybersecurity framework, which has identify, protect, detect, and respond, which is usually security operations, and then recover. Here in my current role, for example, business continuity management and disaster recovery is actually handled outside my function. Other places, for example, when I was the deputy CISO, I had security operations under me. That security operations center, sometimes it does not today report into me as the CISO here. And so these different aspects might drive what the nature of your role is, what the nature of your programs need to be, what the nature of your people need to be, as well as the products that you have in your areas of responsibility. A couple other aspects of the CISO role that could be in or out, and these are good questions to ask if you're looking at a CISO role, is compliance and regulatory reporting. I saw that there was a track on governance, risk, and compliance, which brings me to another key area, data privacy. Data privacy and data privacy officers are sometimes with the CISO, report to the CISO. Sometimes the CISO reports to a data privacy officer. I've actually seen all three of those structures. But compliance and regulatory reporting, that's actually getting quite specific depending on the industry and the regulation, that the CISO has very specific attestation requirements. Here internally, I have worked for a global organization. We have a global security framework, plus we have our local regulatory framework. So again, another aspect of the CISO role may be in, may not be in. The other one I did want to highlight, because I think it's really important to mention, is this risk management capability. A lot of the regulations here in the United States have a lot to do with how are you identifying, measuring, running projects to mitigate, and then measuring again so that you can manage your risk relative to cybersecurity. And then last but not least is the architecture function. Sometimes that is actually under the CISO as well. That way, if architecture is the responsibility of the CISO, and I've seen some titles that look like that, like Chief Technology Officer, CISO, CTSO, that's kind of interesting because then you get to dictate truly secure by design. You're not allowed to buy it, you're not allowed to build it unless it meets this architectural reference structure. So these are several aspects that could be put together, pulled apart, and these are good areas that if you have an affinity or a passion for one of those topics to think about as you look at the CISO role for you. Next topic that we need to talk about when it comes to CISOs is the reporting structure of CISOs. So the first track and trending in the world across the globe, actually, as I look across and talk to some of my global colleagues, CISOs, is you report into what I refer to as the technical track. You report to the CIO. You report to the CDO, as in the Chief Digital Officer. Maybe you report into the CTO. So that is the technical track. And if you are reporting into the technical, then you're probably going to experience situations where you need to be able to tell your boss no. This can sometimes be quite uncomfortable when you are not a peer with the people making the technology decisions. And if that person making that technology decision is your boss and they want to implement a specific thing because they promised the business they'd do it this year, and you're sitting over there going, oh, heck no, that is not secure, that can kind of be uncomfortable when that person's your boss. Another area that I see CISOs starting more and more and more to report into, if you're not going to report to the CIO, well, then who are you going to report to? And again, if your focus for your CISO role is on that risk identification and everything that goes into the risk management that I mentioned, it might make a lot of sense to have the CISO report into the Chief Risk Officer. That's when that CISO is focusing more on risk. Heavily regulated industries. They probably report to a chief compliance officer, possibly chief counsel. I've recently heard from some chief counsel who now suddenly have the CISO reporting to them, and they're not quite sure what to do. Again, this situation makes a lot of sense in a heavily regulated industry where cybersecurity has been identified as a significant threat to the industry. A perfect example of where I'm seeing the trend of CISO's work for the Chief Compliance Officer is in the medical device industry. Medical devices, medical health, medical services, health tech, I'm seeing a lot of CISOs moving into that compliance space. And last but not least, this is my current reporting structure. This is a lot of why I came into Allianz today. Allianz has me reporting directly to the Chief of Operations. That is the responsible board member for both IT and IS. And that means that the two of us actually both have responsibilities to report to the board of directors, but we have one boss and we are peers. And so that removes that healthy tension, let's call it, for the technical track reporting structure. I've also seen a couple of CISOs where, again, the industry or the organization has said that cybersecurity is a cross-enterprise risk area for us. They actually report straight into the CEO as well. You'll also see that CISO reporting to the CEO structure in the cybersecurity technology space. All right. And one last thing, because I did mention I do have a weird sense of humor. This is another one of my favorite memes. So as you think about the reporting structure, just remember the sleeping position of most executives. So with that, I wanted to review what I have just covered, security. Because today's conference, even though I was unfortunately unable to attend because I have a CISO role, lots of meetings, today's conference covered a lot of skills that you would need to be an effective CISO. First would be the leadership and emotional intelligence. I did mention that one of the cons was that you get no rest. That means that there is significant burnout in this industry. My psychology degree, even though it seems kind of odd that I would have gone into technology with a psychology degree, my area of focus happened to have been post-traumatic stress disorder. Weirdly enough, 30 years later, yes, I just dated myself, 30 plus years later, I am actually applying some of those post-traumatic stress disorder and some of those counseling skills on my team every day, not to mention myself. Understanding privacy. If the data privacy officer works for you, fine. If that data privacy officer is your peer, if that data privacy officer is your boss, you as the CISO really need to understand data governance, data ownership, and then what is important to protect. Because information security and data privacy are like conjoined twins. They can never function without each other. As I mentioned before, sometimes the SOC will be under you. Sometimes that detect and respond capability will be under you. Other times you'll have to simply identify risks associated with ineffective security operations. But you really do need to understand security operations at enough of a level that you can sniff out some BS if somebody's laying that down. Your job as the CISO is to understand what security operations teams need and also work to make sure that the business is telling the security operations team what is anomalous behavior, what should they be watching, what should they detect. You also really do need to have a sense of the control frameworks, understanding governance, understanding the board reporting structure. You really need to understand risk, identification, measurement, mitigation, measure again, management, and then compliance. It really does help to understand the regulatory regimes that you need to operate in and under. And today's conference hopefully gave all of you an opportunity to network with each other so that you can enable the mentoring. And I was serious about that mentoring sideways, mentoring receiving, as well as mentoring giving. It's really important that females in this industry look out for each other. So a couple of questions, thought-provoking hopefully, to leave you with. Which aspects of the CISO role are you going to enjoy? Do you really get excited about security operations? Maybe risk turns you on. Maybe it's really the operations. Who do you want to report to? That matters as well, because that will really help shape your focus of what kind of CISO you end up needing to be. I also strongly recommend that you be true to yourself and to your strength. Ask yourself, am I really strong at technical? In which case, maybe you want and you will receive greater career satisfaction from becoming a security architect. So what's your strength? And then my recommendation that I always tell people that I talk to about careers, and especially if you think you want to be a CISO, is go ahead and select a focus, but you're going to need all three. You need to understand the business you're protecting. You need to be able to speak to the business about fairly complex things, but you also need to help the business understand, and you as a security professional need to understand, what does somebody want to steal or what does somebody want to break about my business? The technical acumen, we've already talked about that a couple of times, that's absolutely key. I think one of the keys to my success is the long IT career I had. And then finally, that third, that ability to consult. And when I say consult, that means speak two languages, speak technical, speak business. And you need to be able to consult with your own employees as well as your organization. And then last but not least, I think it's really important that we all collect our own set of hype women. At the Oscars, one of my favorite comedians got super excited and was screaming, and the term hype woman was born, and I just love it because that explains why the people that are in my personal network that feed me when I get down, because I see the underbelly of humanity every day and I get exhausted with 12-hour days, have other women around you to hype you on. I would never have become a CISO if I hadn't had not just my mentor, but my friend, the CISO of Shell Oil, cheering me on and saying I could do it. And then my last piece of advice for all of you is to practice radical self-care. That's the post-traumatic psychologist in me coming out, but it's really important that you recognize when you're burning out and how hard you're working, and that you make sure to take care of yourself. All right, so with that, I think I'm right at 23 minutes, and I believe I'm allowed to take some questions. I see some comments. Yes, the CISO is actually getting no sleep. There is no CISO in that bed. Oh, and I forgot, I should move out of the way. So this is a little piece of art I created several years ago. Hopefully you can all see that. I call that disk error 49. So in case anybody was wondering what's behind Jack's head. That's a great question. How do I manage work-life balance? Well, it's weird, but I live 1,200 miles away from my husband because he is running our oyster farm in North Carolina, and I happen to live in Minnesota. But I have my son out here with me, and I'm going to be in a heap of trouble in next year because he's about to move away and go to college, and he cooks, and I don't. So, how do I do balance, though? Seriously, I work international hours on a pretty regular basis, but I have an admin who is my calendar guardian, and she's fantastic. And she and I have worked out various things that when I have an important event, she builds me a little breathing room in there. But truly, the only way I was successful, and this is advice I got from my mentor, the CISO of the oil company. She said the only way you're going to get work-life balance is if you enable your leadership team. So gather a good leadership team as a CISO, and then have that leadership team truly empowered and give them the decision, give them the authority, give them the budget, give them the team that they need. And then you can actually back off a little bit and think more strategically. So it is exhausting, but I do limit myself on my international collaboration hours. And I have several hobbies that require a great deal of focus. I have some high risk hobbies, like I like riding motorcycles, but I also sew random costumes and stuff. The more complicated the sewing project, the better, because then I don't think about work and I focus instead on sewing. So any hobby that requires a great deal of concentration, some other folks I know balance in some gaming time, etc. So have hobbies, have people that take care of you, and then have a badass leadership team. Okay. So great question, Lisa. Thank you so much. Or sorry, Anonymous is asking about the skill set like sales. So I am selling security every flippin' day. Seriously, I have to sell my business that they need to staff my function. I am selling my users, which sometimes feels like psychological operations, but I need to sell them on why they cannot click on the phishing link. I am selling security to my IT teams on a regular basis. So tying together that disparate skill set and applying it to your job, and especially as a CISO, you can use something that feels kind of disparate like sales or maybe psychology, and you'll discover that you will end up employing that because by any means necessary, you will secure your organization. So I did want to just say thank you so much for allowing me to speak to the Day of Security, because my mission truly is to inspire and empower the next generation of cyber warriors so that I can retire in peace, knowing my economy and my infrastructure is being protected by people who are going to do it far better than I ever could. So with that, I really just want to say thank you so much, Kelly, and everyone for having me here at Day of Security.